Hi, I'm Doug Crashley here in Calgary, Alberta, as part of Crash Conditioning. And today I'd like to talk to everyone at the Virtual Hockey Summit about integrating your conditioning into your practice plan. From myself and others as strength coaches to you as hockey coaches, how can we work together to bring the best out of our athletes? We know that conditioning is important for hockey, and we understand that it's an aspect of the game that over the years we've seen it to be an important aspect of our athletes and to have success for our teams. But conditioning for hockey can be described as the ability to maintain performance characteristics such as power, speed, agility, thought process throughout shifts, periods, games, and a season. Each of those aspects, albeit very different from a shift compared to a season, it is important to have all of the different works of the energy system and develop them thoroughly throughout the season. Ice hockey demands a proficiency across the entire continuum of energy needs. We know that players have to be powerful and explosive. We also know they have to be able to push themselves through a long threshold at the end of a shift. The ability to recover after games or in between shifts are all huge aspects. You've often read and seen on Twitter or social media about what are the most difficult sports to train for. And a lot of us, obviously biasedly, will tell you hockey because of how many different energy systems that we cross regularly throughout the game for each of the athletes and how important it is throughout a season. So energy system development, a better term, I think, in my opinion, than the term of conditioning, is a training that is implemented to increase the efficiency of the body in response to the metabolic demand. All of the body's energy systems play a supporting role at the onset of activity. Thus, any form of training can be used to promote energy system development. Specific training variables such as mode of exercise, duration, intensity, and rest interval are important, but they'll also dictate the type of adaptations elicited. Here's a really easy chart that we use here to kind of understand and explain the different energy systems. I think it's something that's important, and it'll be important as we go through today's presentation for you to understand the different aspects of training that you do and the different aspects of conditioning and how they are correlated to the different aspects of the game. So a 0 to 6 second shift or process or time, the phosphorus energy system, maximal intensity would be that quick first burst to the puck, a shot, that first acceleration. And then as that athlete now goes from that 6 to about 30 seconds, they start extending from phosphorus to the anaerobic glycolysis, a different energy system. And then as that shift and that continuation of the workload goes, that intensity still being high, maybe not maximal like before, you now are fully in anaerobic glycolysis, where then as that extends through to the 2 to 3 minute period, now you become less intense, we call it moderate. That workload becomes more to the aerobic glycolysis, anaerobic and aerobic glycolysis. And then we can talk about, so the end game, real low intensity work, oxidative energy system. Those are those greater than 3 minutes. We'll often talk about that kind of being a recovery energy system or a submaximal effort energy system. So those are important for us to know as coaches, how we train them, how they're integrated, how they correlate to the games, and we go from there. So those are important things. Good one to have, good chart to have kind of in the back of your mind when you're breaking down, as we'll see today, how we sequence our practices and how we identify our needs for our team. So a really good strength coach, a guy who's really been focused on hockey the last couple of years, Kevin Neal's done a ton of research. There's a couple of young guys here in the industry that I think have done a really good job in the last couple of years with their literature they produced. Kevin Neal, formerly Mike Potenza's assistant strength coach in San Jose, is now the head strength coach of the Boston Bruins. And had a chance to meet and work to actually co-speak at a couple of presentations in the past with him or seminars, and I thought he was really brilliant. So I used a bunch of his stuff because I think he's done a great job with it. One of his points out of his work is, as he says, although qualifying at precise on-ice workloads is a challenge, it is generally accepted that players achieve sufficient speed and glycolytic work from the practices and games. What he's saying there is that we get a ton of work conditioning-wise and stimulus to get better through, most importantly, our practices and our games. That suggests that off-ice efforts should primarily focus on the maintenance of power and strength along with durability qualities such as mobility, stability, and aerobic conditioning. Therefore, the stuff that we do primarily in season, off the ice, that's where we focus on our strength work in the weight room, our power work in the weight room, some of our mobility, whether that be yoga, whether that be mobility joint work, stabilization work through our core and our joints, and then a little bit of aerobic conditioning, so our low intensity work, we save that for off the ice. So we know that practices where we get a lot of our conditioning or higher intensity, maximal work, off ice is the best spot for us to get a lot of our low intensity aerobic conditioning based work, as well as the weight room work, power, strength, and the mobility, stability work that we get through different attributes or certain tools of training that we use. So today, the big word, I think one of the catch words is a big focus in the hockey scouting world is analytics. The analytics guys are on one side of the table. The old school, we'll call them the hockey feel and read and the art of hockey scouting on the other end of the table. In the strength and conditioning world, that might be referred to as the sports science of the analytics guys versus the coaches, the art of coaching guys on the other table. But I think it's important on both sides that you blend both the science, the analytics, the sports science, as well as the art of player identification, or in my world, player coaching. So one of the things that's real important is what you're seeing now at the highest levels, the National Hockey League, college, major, junior, and programs that have bigger budgets. You're seeing a lot more of tracking that's occurring. You're seeing heart rate monitors being worn on players on the ice. You'll often see videos of strength coaches on the side on the bench with their laptops looking and identifying what's happening. You'll see guys sometimes even on the bench during a game, identifying kind of where their baseline energy systems or their heart rates are. At the NHL level right now, they're not allowed to collect data in games due to the CBA, and you've seen that a lot more. But over time, you're probably going to start to see more and more of data collection happening live in action. And so heart rate monitoring is great. You're able to see how hard athletes go. So in a practice, you often see, they'll see on the computer, so this guy worked really hard, and then you can see where heart rate fluctuates in the recovery periods. It's a great tool for coaches to know when to go and when to pull back, and also to identify kind of workload or efforts by athletes. Another great data tracking or system is called Catapult, or the kinematic data collection accelerometry. You're able to see a whole bunch of stuff now. You see the GPSs, you're seeing all this information. It gives a ton of information to the coaching staff about the way they practice, the training, and at one point, like I said, you're going to see more and more game level control. You're going to see video coaches with all this information, more and more using it and being able to relay information to the bench or directly on the bench on iPads and see where players are. Imagine you as a coach being able to look down and see all your players' heart rates. So when we're tired and we're going really hard, we get a high heart rate. Then we get a player gets on the bench, and you're able to go, okay, who's recovering quickly? Who's able to go back on the ice? And you're able to identify which players are able to reload or recover their energy late in the game. It's get into a penalty kill with, we're up by one, a penalty kill late in the game. You're going to want to trust a little bit of that science. Say, hey, who has got the energy to get back out there and be good? Because along with their body, their muscle fatigue, you also obviously have mental fatigue, and that leads to mistakes, and mistakes lead to pucks behind you. And so that's one you're going to see a lot more and more over the years. At the NHL level, they use these metrics to prescribe practice and pregame training skating loads or training loads that allow for optimal athlete readiness. So they're able to go and tell coaches, this is the amount of efforted skating into practice that is most ideal this day prior to a game, this day after a game day skate, so the next practice, and they're able to manage their workloads via that type of information. So obviously really valuable, but not necessarily something that's being used at all levels of hockey. It's very expensive. It's very, very time consuming, and you have to have people who can actually specialize in that. So a couple tests that you often see or training assessments that you can often use and anybody can use. If you have a stopwatch, you're able to measure things. So your read, repeat, sprint, skate test, you got a 30 to 15 second intermittent on ice beep test. There's all types of work that you can do on the ice and off the ice to at least measure your players' conditioning level so you have an idea where they are. So you could do that once every quarter, maybe once a month. I'd really recommend a lot of these tests being done about, like we call them training blocks, but like 4 to 6 week blocks or even 8-week blocks on a training season. But you can do some measures and you kind of know which players are able to recover quicker, which players are more successful in those heavy minute played moments. I've had the previous experience working with a couple defensemen. One plays in Chicago Blackhawks, Duncan Keith, and I remember one of his VO2 scores at one point was around 70, which was off the charts. Another guy, Thomas Hickey, when he was drafted by LA way back, same thing. He was in the high 60s, and then the VO2 score, which compared to a lot of your typical score defensemen, you're like 54, 58, they're kind of off the charts. And we all know with Duncan Keith, he plays a ton of minutes. Maybe in the 2000s, played the most minutes total, high intensity minutes. There's a reason for it. He's got the capacity to do that. One of the things when I was working with him is that was so natural for him in our training that I actually worked against that and tried to work more on his high-end speed, his explosiveness, because he had the ability to have push his threshold so far. He was obviously a pretty special athlete. And guys like that, as Matt Nickel, my good friend out in Toronto, strength coach, often says, our number one job is not to get in the way of a player's actual ability. So don't wreck what they got. So one of the tests I mentioned, the repeat sprint skate test, simply you're just using a 300-foot skating course. It allows you to measure a little bit of conditioning, gives you some scores. It's a great way to, one, measure and compare your athletes, players. Also, two, you can use that data to show over a season improvement or lack thereof. And then for a coach, you're going to know your players who do better on testing work or training work are going to be able to be more trusted, like I said, late in games. So it's important. A couple different tests for you. The 30-15 intermittent ice test is a beep test basically for the ice. So if anybody's ever done the beep test off the ice, I actually think although others will argue that, I think it actually is a decent comparative score for looking at your athletes, having an idea where they are, especially young athletes. Often I'll do it quite a bit when our off season with athletes are younger players, just to get them used to competing and pushing themselves against their comfort zone. But I think it's just as important. And I think one of the things that I would recommend more is also do both the off-ice testing and an on-ice type testing that's comparable. So one, you can show the relation of, hey, if you're at top 5% off the ice, most likely that player who's they're all equal level skills will be a top 5% on the ice. And it starts to show and also show the athlete that the off-ice training and testing is important, but also it gives you a bit of an idea, hey, this is where our athlete is. It's, we want to know what they are on the ice. The end. So we talk about a few things. Here's a quick video showing nothing more than a basic practice. Fortunate enough to have right now, we have some Western Hockey League players who are here because of COVID. So this is from the previous week here, just doing some skating work. I'm going to leave the volume off, but you'll see as they're working a little bit, I think it was every 10 seconds, they'd get turned from going up one end, a whistle blow, and then the drill would change for about 20 seconds of work. And I believe it was supposed to be almost a 1 to 4 work rest ratio that day. And this is Dave Lowry of the Brown and Wheat Kings, one of the obviously premier coaches here in Western Canada and coaching the National Hockey League. So he's doing some skates with our two groups together. And as you can see, they're getting after it a little bit. So simply speaking, the whistle blows, next guys go. He's working that down, pressure. So not only are we playing in a game type situation, we're working on pressure from behind. You're working, the goalies are getting work. The players with the puck are getting pressure to make plays, but he's getting the conditioning levels done that are appropriate to that time of year. So really simple. We'll talk about the 3 ways that you can integrate conditioning and energy system development. And one of the ways will definitely be to integrate that into your game style or game-like practice. So here we go. The 3 ways to integrate conditioning into your practice plans. So as I just spoke about, I think the number one way to integrate conditioning into your practice plans, your end result will be gameplay or game-like drills. But you always have to start with a base of your training. And one of those ways, and I believe it's way too important to ignore. So when I talk about integrating into your practice plans, I talk about off-ice conditioning and off-ice training. And again, the reason I say this, when we talk about our practice to game ratio, we're often forgetting that our training, our development training, our off-ice training becomes one of our practices to help with player development. So in your practice to game ratio, your off-ice training should count towards your practice when part of your development tool and use it as part of a development tool. but not as a babysitting service. Too often in minor hockey, for those of us who coach in minor hockey or have kids in minor hockey, you'll see that conditioning is added into the schedule without being part of the integrated player seasonal plan. It has to be part of your seasonal plan. It has to be integrated because it is one of your practices. It isn't just an hour of time spent or a week or 2 hours time spent, but it should be part of accumulation of load to help make your athletes better. So that's the first step, I think, in integrating conditioning in your practice plans. Now that can be starting off with some types of measures and using the different work-rest ratios based on the time of year and that stage of your practice or your training. There's ways to do that, whether it's on bikes, slide boards, on obviously running, skipping, and then some work that you often know, you'll hear about Tabata training, which is a great way to get aerobic capacity, aerobic threshold stuff. That 20 seconds of work to 10 seconds of rest for a total 8 cycles or 4 minutes is a sneaky way at the end of every workout, at the end of every practice to improve, not only maintain, but improve levels of base conditioning. So I think it's a good key, but off-ice conditioning is a big part of that. The second step to that, or the second way, is controlled or isolated drills. So these are drills that are similar to the previous skating test that we talked about. Things that have no read and react. They're very, I'll call them very closed chain, but they're very simplistic. It could be 30 seconds of a lap skate, resting for X amount of seconds, depending on your work rest. It could be skating and return, so some sprint return skating. We'll call those controlled and isolated drills because they're on the ice. You're controlling this time of work, the time of break. You're also controlling, there's no changes, there's no puck chases, there's no puck battles. So I think that would be the second layer of this type of integration of the conditioning. Now, although I did say the third one, gameplay or game-like drills, is the most important, I do fully believe that you have to have all the aspects and build on top of them to get the most out of your gameplay or game-like drills, to have the intensity, have the base conditioning. But our end game should be able to do high-intensity drills on the ice, develop to mirror and develop gameplay attributes at the prescribed work-rest ratio and intensity. So that's a key thing. But we can't just go straight to that. You want to develop a little bit of a threshold through some control. For instance, a controlled and isolated drill might be, how far a player can skate or how many times they can go there and back in 30 seconds or 20 seconds. Now you measure that, and that might be the base level goal. So, hey, you got there and back X amount of times in 20 seconds. Well, now for the rest of the season, you got to beat that, but also that that's the distance you can cover in a period of time. And now when you bring the gameplay, you want to be able to cover that, even though now you're reacting, you're fighting for pucks, you're racing, you're passing. There's changes that are uncontrolled, because along with the conditioning side of that, now we're starting to develop the brain processing. So the read and react, adaptation and reaction work. That's key. So as we talked about practice plans, how to plan our practice or our drill sequencing to ensure that we are taking advantage on stacking our drills to make sure they work together. So a lot like what we do in the gym for a general day in the training kind of room or in the at the track, we'll always start with some, we'll call them activation work. So early on, some warm-ups, some general movements, some speed preparation. The idea of that is to get some of the mechanics moving correctly, get our bodies warmed up, our athletes' bodies warmed up. If we're at the track, we're doing some track prep. If we're in the gym, we're doing some movement prep that's specific to the day's work. So on the ice, you have to think the same way. The first 4 to 8 minutes can be some prep exercise. We're working on loosening up our hips. We're working on really making sure when we skate, we're staying low, we're pushing horizontally, we're not getting vertical or skating, that type of stuff. Because the next sequence of work that you want to do should be really high output, maximal effort. We're talking speed work, we're talking explosive work, and working on the components. Typically that would be more detailed skill work. So that would be, like I said, our sprints, our edging work, our intense, really high quality change of directions, puck pulls, and so on. For our goaltenders, that could be as simple as more of our explosive post work, our positional work, but really high intensity. Our work to rest ratio is big on the rest. So if we're working for 6 to 8 seconds, now our rest period is extending quite a bit. What we can't do is we can't do a whole bunch of efforts with limited rest and then turn our athlete who's getting fatigued and expect them to get faster, especially at the start of practice. So it's really key movement sequencing or movement work needs to be done with high intensity quality reps, but also extended rest. That's how we become better. We do. The flip side to that is if we run an athlete into the ground off the start, they get fatigued. Now all of a sudden they're a little bit less quick, they're sloppier, they're tired. Now we're setting those as their habits mechanically, but also their habits in play as well. So if we did that for the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes of practice, we just blew them out of the water. The next 30 minutes, they might not have the ability to do anything more than 55 or 60% effort. So now we're training them in game-like situations as the practice goes on to play at 50 and 60%. If we can slowly prep them up and as intensity goes and then elongate that period, it allows us to get more out of our athlete. It allows us to get better learning or development. And then it sets us up for as the practice goes on, we get into our general strength or our tactics. So in the weight room, that'll be our general strength work, our tactics work in practice, a little bit longer period of work. The rest is still decently high, but it's not putting us in a situation where we're full max with long rest. It's almost a 1-to-4 ratio, 1-to-3 ratio. And then we get into conditioning where now at the end of practice, where the intensity might not be as high, at the end of practice, we're going pretty hard and our rest period is very limited. It might be, like I said before, 20 seconds of hard effort, 10 seconds of rest, 30 seconds of hard effort, 30 seconds of rest, whatever it may be for at your time of year, for your athletes. But now at the end, you're finishing them up, they're fatigued, you're able to develop them skill-wise and biomechanically, hockey-wise, and then at the end, conditioning-wise. And that's a good way to set up your practices, similar to the way that we would do with our workouts. Every day, we'll say on a Monday, typically we do sprint work. Like I said, we prep, we get into a little bit of activation work, some movement prep. Now we go to speed prep, we get the nervous system firing off. We do our sprints. Then we get into our weight room. Our first stuff typically is power work. So Olympic lifts, high power, low repetition work with lots of rest. Boom, a couple, whether our sequence is 1 or 2 different exercises of that. Now we go into our general strength work. Now our rep, so our volume or our time and attention is longer, no different than a longer drill, but our rest period probably stays the same or even limits a little bit less than our previous. And then at the end of our workouts, just like the end of practice, we often talk about finishing up with a little energy system work. So that's where we'll do a bunch of work with a little bit less rest, and then our athletes go on their way. If we were to do it the opposite, like I said, you start off and you condition them. Now they're tired. By when you go to work on the biomechanic work, the skill development work, the movement development work, they're going to be tired. Now we're just training them at less than ideal, so less than 100%. That's not making them better. That's just making them tired. I refer to the term, I use that 4th gear specialist. We're trying to make 5th and 6th, maybe 7th gear specialist, explosive athletes, quick, making them better movers. Well, if you don't give them that really quality rest and really focus on high quality reps, you're going to turn them into someone who can only really work in that 4th gear. So often I call that kind of going through the motions a little bit. You can't have athletes going through the motions. So here you are, the work to rest ratios, quick little chart to kind of give you an idea on your working time versus your resting time. So like I said, simply early on, the ATP, PCRs, that explosive stuff. Like I mentioned, shooting, explosive first steps, really working on explosive stuff. So you have a high output, you're shooting a puck as hard as you can, maybe a couple of shots, maybe a pass, shoot, a couple of skates and a shot. Now you're going to actually rest, and you're working on really making sure that skill is high end. It's like a 1-to-4, 1-to-5, 1-to-6 work rest ratio. That's going to help develop that to its greatest capacity. And the same thing for skating. You're working on that first step quickness, one of the first things that a lot of players ask for. Well, you can't work at a lot of volume and expect to get quicker in those first steps. So work on those, have rest, work on those. And again, for the goalies, same thing. You want to make sure you're not just going through the motions with the goalies. They've got to work at high capacity, long rest. And that's how you get better. The anaerobic capacity, the second degree of that conditioning. Now you're talking a little bit more of a 1-to-2 work rest ratio. That's basically tolerating prolonged high intensity work bouts with a little bit less than complete or incomplete rest. So you're resting, but you're not getting fully rested the way that you're in the ATP PCR. You're kind of trying to fill the tank completely. So that's one of the first keys. So with that said, a few things that I think that we talk about, and I talked about before, is things not to do. And so the running joke is just because you can doesn't mean you should. For a lot of us, when we've heard about unplanned and unregulated bag skates, I mean we can do it. It's really easy. One of the first things that I can talk about is in a regular world, people come to our training center, and with young parents or parents of athletes, one of their first things they ask or things they think about. Are you tired, or did you kick their butt? Did you work them? Did you get them? They look tired. And that's what makes people happy, is seeing perception of exhaustion or fatigue. And again, going back to the just because you can doesn't mean you should mentality is, when you work, you want to work with a plan. So unplanned and unregulated bag skates, although, there's a time and a place for them, and that's up to you as coaches, but doing it without a progression plan and how that works, how that affects not only the next day, the 3 days after, but also how you're going to progress that over time, isn't doing anyone good. It's probably more than not wasting expensive and quality ice time. And so that's one of the things that I think are really key, is when we're doing our training on the ice, let's get full advantage of the expensive ice. Let's be efficient with our time on the ice. And so when you saw in the previous video, you could, first little bit, you could hear, and I let it play for a couple seconds, but you could hear the whistle blowing. And if you listen to all, you hear the whistle every 10 seconds. Well, a lot of coaches will have, they have way better than me. They have great sense of their timing. Every 10 seconds, they know how to push it. They're watching players. If you can be specific to your work and rest, so if it's a 6 to 10, maybe it's 12 seconds of work that you're working on. The week before you had 8, maybe 2 weeks before that you had 6 of high intensity, then you rest, and then you can time out your work and then your rest. It allows you to really develop the energy systems in a direction that you want to go, versus just throwing it all out. It's like throwing mud against the wall and hoping something sticks, bag skates, which I don't think is going to benefit anyone. There are better ways to use skating and using our time. So that's one of the things I think are really important. No different than in the gym. We can't just run our athletes in the ground every day. If they come out of here every day exhausted, bang, chins drop, shoulders drop, there's a pretty good chance that we're going back. We talked about running into a deficit, running into a non-development pattern. So they're getting worked, tired. They never really overcompensate or supercompensate and get better. They're constantly running them down, and it goes back to that whole fourth gear specialist. We're going to wreck our athletes. The key is to make high performance athletes, high performance hockey players, and make our, analogies can go forever. Make our supercars and our race cars and our sports cars go. We're not driving the old Chev Celebrity that I had back in the day when I met probably Aaron Wilbur here from the coach's site when I knew him. So here we are again, just showing some more video. One of the small ice games. I don't know, we got a few Western Hockey League guys here, obviously off during this COVID period. This is a drill from Dave Lowry. I said again, Brandon Wheat Kings. Like I said, one of the obviously more well-respected coaches here, probably in the world of hockey, but especially out west. He's well-known in Calgary, runs a great skate and well-thought-out skates. So you'll see that they have the kind of uncontrolled. So this is game like uncontrolled that way. The work to rest ratios are a little bit undermanaged because it's whether or not your side has a puck or not, but he's able to manage the overall work time. And then at the same time, now we're adding the side of competition. And I don't think this is a part where you see a guy get cross-checked in the chin, or one of my players, not going to name him, swinging and tomahawking his stick on that pad in the middle because he was pouting about something. So I cut that part out, I hope. So as you could see there, as one side is working, and it was probably, I didn't mess me, I think it was around 16 to 18 seconds of work there. So your 20 seconds of mostly active work. We can make the ice small, we can make it more intense, we can lengthen it out and have more activity. But the other side is not going, puck moves over, or the coach controls it, and when they blow the whistle, puck is shot over, now they play. Obviously you're scoring on one net, not the other, however it may be. Tons of small ice games. You guys are going to know better than me. Not my specialty, necessarily small ice games, but there's lots of games that you all have that you can all you have to do is control your work to rest ratio, sequence it when it fits best into 1, your practice plan, 2, your weekly plan, and 3, your seasonal plan, and then and make it work. So the ability to, again, using a stopwatch is going to allow you to control your work to rest ratio. It allows you to have a more managed, without heart rate monitors, without the catapult systems of the NHL. You can more or less manage your working load and your effort. And the final one, and I think this is an important one, I was mentioning Dave Lowry this summer, but also another coach that during this period before he headed to Russia, Bill Peters, I noticed one thing. I was able to have our guys skate with both these guys this summer. I have a number of great coaches, skill coaches. Steve Serdachny, the famous skating and skills coach, comes down. He works with a lot of our athletes. But my experience with Bill and Dave the last couple of years was lesser. I don't see them as much. I was really impressed. I think it almost caught me off guard of both guys, how much fun they had with the guys and how their enjoyment, their engagement, and the intensity. And I watched them, their intensity and enjoyment of it increased the intensity of the player. So the greatest thing I took from watching their very intense, high-paced skates was the amount of fun they had with the players and how these players, didn't matter if it was a Western Hockey League, the younger guys. I think there's 4 or 5 guys are in the draft this year, a couple guys in that group that were drafted last year, a couple guys coming up, a couple guys in the past, then some NHL players, some American Hockey League in between players, guys that are in Europe. The one thing I noticed, every one of them from 33 years old to 16 years old on those 2 skates is how they responded by increasing their intensity and pace alongside the coaches, their engagement, and their fun. Those are pretty 2 stoic men, like Bill Peters and Dave Lowry. You see them, they look grouchy and intense. I actually was caught off guard at how much fun and how excited they were to be on the ice and how excited they were during the skates. As long as these guys were on the ice for me, Dave's been on the ice quite a bit in the last few weeks. And this past week alone, I noticed, I'm like, this guy's having a lot of fun. And then I watched the skate, and I'm like, holy, these athletes are increasing their pace, the more fun the coaches are having. And I think that's a key component, something that I probably underestimated in my past, never thought about as much, a key component in helping our athletes pick up their intensity to get what you need in that integrated conditioning. And I often talk about it in the gym, and I often talk about it when we're working with young athletes. It's the tone of our voice. It's the way that we speak to athletes. I got a gravelly voice. It's been this way forever. I actually spent most of one summer in my early years where I damaged my vocal cords because I was yelling too much. I was trying to always be louder. And in my previous gym, I was trying to be louder than the music system in this huge gym. That I might have only been the only person in the gym with 4 or 5 or 8 of my athletes, but they'd have the music cranking. So I was always trying to be louder than the music, and I actually damaged my vocal cords. But I'll tell our coaches a lot, though, not yelling, but the tone and the energy that we have will absolutely affect and then change the way that our athletes respond to our message. And I think that's important in the gym, but then seeing it with these 2 great coaches that I'm like, it's unbelievable, even at that level, to see it from the players on the ice. I think that's a key component, and I think that's a way to do it. So today we talked about how to integrate conditioning into your hockey practice and all the aspects of things to do, your work to rest ratio, the different types of energy systems, how to sequence them within a practice, how to make them work. At the same time, if you look deep enough, I can send out some links along the way. You can contact me. I can give you some direction. There's ways to sort of build up your development over a season or an off season. Typically, I always say the first thing you want to do is assess. So test your players, get an assessment. Where are they at? And then you build your program from back to front, from where do you want to be to where are they at, and try to figure out the steps. And when we program those steps, you always have to think about, in particular, different things that may affect it and things that are uncontrolled. Players getting sick, players being run down, especially now in this year, the COVID-19, 2020 times, where you're going to see some effects of players who may have had positive COVID tests and the effects on the respiratory system because of that. So thank you very much. In particular, I want to thank 2 of my lead coaches here at Crash, Kalen Relkoff and Curtis Freder, for having a huge part in getting this done, because I'm not tech savvy. Have a great day.